morning the contract was signed, the city outside the glass tower looked like it was holding its breath. And so was Margaret Hale, even though she had built an empire on never hesitating. At 46, she was the CEO of a logistics software company headquartered in Chicago, the kind of woman business magazines admired for her discipline and feared for her precision. Yet that morning her hands trembled slightly as she reviewed a private agreement that had nothing to do with revenue or growth. She was hiring a man for $5,000 a month, not for strategy, not for consulting, but for something she could not bring herself to name. And if you were standing there in her office, watching the lake shimmer beyond the windows, you might have wondered what kind of loneliness could survive at the top, and what you would do if success left you this quiet inside. Margaret had not always been alone, but the years had peeled people away in subtle, almost polite ways. Her parents passed within a year of each other, her marriage collapsed under the weight of 2 careers and no shared silences, and friendships faded as her calendar filled with flights and meetings. At night, her penthouse felt like a hotel room she had overstayed in, filled with expensive furniture that absorbed sound but offered no warmth. She told herself she did not need comfort, that she had chosen this life, but some evenings she sat on the edge of her bed wondering if achievement was supposed to feel this empty. What if this were you, she thought more than once, surrounded by everything you worked for, yet aching for something you could not put on a balance sheet? Would you admit it, or would you keep pretending? The idea came to her after a charity gala, when she noticed how effortlessly people leaned toward one another, how human connection seemed to flow without negotiation. She did not want romance, she told herself, and she did not want pity. She wanted presence, reliability, someone who would show up without asking for more than she could give. So she posted a discreet listing through a private agency, vague enough to protect her reputation, specific enough to filter out curiosity seekers. That was how Thomas Reed walked into her office one grey afternoon, wearing a borrowed suit that fit his shoulders better than his life did at the moment. Thomas was 38, a former construction project manager from Indiana whose life had unraveled after a workplace accident shattered his knee and his savings in the same year. Medical bills swallowed his insurance settlement, and his marriage dissolved under the stress of recovery and debt. He moved to Chicago chasing contract work that never stabilized, sleeping in his car for a few weeks before a church shelter helped him find temporary housing. Faith had not fixed his life, but it had given him the habit of waking each morning believing there was still a reason to try. When the agency called him about the unusual offer, he hesitated, not out of judgment but exhaustion. He needed money, but he also needed dignity, and he prayed quietly that the two would not have to be enemies again. From the beginning, the arrangement was precise on paper. Thomas would accompany Margaret to events, share meals, travel occasionally, and provide companionship without expectations beyond time and discretion. No intimacy, no emotional dependence, no interference with her professional decisions. The money was generous, almost absurd, and Thomas accepted it with a mix of gratitude and unease. Margaret, for her part, told herself she was buying structure, not affection. Still, something shifted the first evening they sat across from each other in a quiet restaurant, the city humming beyond the windows, both aware that this connection existed only because it had been priced. Days turned into weeks, and something unspoken began to grow in the spaces between their scheduled interactions. Thomas noticed how Margaret's posture softened when she laughed, how her relentless control gave way to moments of vulnerability she did not seem to plan. Margaret noticed how Thomas listened without scanning the room, how his attention felt like rest rather than demand. He spoke of his past without bitterness, of losing things without losing faith, and it unsettled her more than any boardroom challenge ever had. She had built her life on avoiding need, yet here she was, waiting for conversations that had no agenda. If you felt yourself changing like this, would you stop it out of fear, or would you let it happen because it finally felt human? The hardship did not vanish just because something gentle entered their lives. Thomas still limped on long walks, still sent part of his paycheck to cover old debts, still battled the quiet shame of needing help. Margaret still faced ruthless investors, public scrutiny, and the constant pressure to be unbreakable. One evening, after a particularly brutal earnings call, she sat in her office long after the building emptied, the city lights flickering like distant stars. Thomas was there because the contract said he would be, but what mattered was how he stayed, how he did not rush to fill the silence, how he let her breathe. She realized then that the loneliness she had tried to manage with money was not something that could be outsourced without consequence. Gradually, the boundaries blurred, not through touch or promises, but through care. Margaret began asking about Thomas's physical therapy, about his job applications, about the church community that had helped him survive when pride nearly broke him. Thomas began to worry about Margaret in ways that had nothing to do with his paycheck, praying for her before meetings, noticing when she skipped meals, wishing she could see herself as more than a title. Both of them knew the deal was expiring in a few months, and the knowledge hung between them like a clock ticking too loudly. Some nights, Margaret wondered if she was paying to delay a loss she was not brave enough to face. When the end came, it did not arrive with drama but with paperwork. Margaret informed Thomas that she would not be renewing the agreement, citing a need to recalibrate her life. She handed him a final check larger than promised, enough to give him real footing again. Thomas accepted it with humility and sadness, understanding that some gifts are meant to end so they can mean something. They parted with restraint, both pretending this was what they had intended all along, both carrying more than they could explain. Life moved on, as it always does, but not unchanged. Thomas used the money to complete certification courses and secured a stable project management role with a non-profit housing developer, helping build homes for families who knew too well what instability felt like. Margaret stepped back from day-to-day operations, appointing a trusted successor and rediscovering Sundays she had forgotten how to keep. She volunteered anonymously at a food pantry near her apartment, learning the quiet grace of being needed without being known. Neither spoke publicly about what had passed between them, yet both felt it shaping their choices, teaching them that connection cannot be owned, only received. Years later, on a snowy evening in a small neighborhood church, Margaret attended a community fundraiser without fanfare, drawn by something she could not name. Thomas was there too, coordinating volunteers, his walk steadier, his smile easy. Their eyes met across the room, and in that moment, the past did not feel like regret but like gratitude. They spoke briefly, warmly, as equals unbound by contracts, aware that what they had shared had changed them without trapping them. Love, Margaret realized, was not what she had bought, but what had been awakened when she stopped pretending she did not need it. Before the story ends, take a moment to comment and share what part of this journey stayed with you the most, because sometimes your reflection becomes someone else's hope. As the lights dimmed and snow fell quietly outside, Margaret walked home alone but not lonely, carrying the strange peace of knowing that even temporary kindness can leave permanent marks. If this story stirred something in your heart, if it reminded you of second chances, quiet faith, or the courage to admit need, then please like, comment, share, and subscribe, but only if it truly moved you, because stories like this live on through the hearts they touch.